Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Usually we have Charlene or Gordon doing the intros, but today you've got Brad. Charlene's gone AWOL. And Gordon, what happened to Chris? What happened to Gordon?
I think he found a reason not to be here. He's very creative like that.
Yeah, definitely right. So, guys, welcome. We're going to be chatting with Chris today. And Offensive. I think we met before at the venue
Mhm.
Yes,
in
we
the
have
very
indeed.
deep, deep south with our passports. So I'm so glad to have you here, brother. It'll be really nice between the three of us. Chris has prepared a nice kind of inoffensive, prepared a nice presentation. So I don't think I'm going to interfere too much. But what I would suggest though is if you really want to get the best out of these sessions, is ask as many questions as you can in the chat section. Try and use the chat area rather than the Q&A. It just helps, it makes it easier for us to track because there's usually quite a few questions that come through. And Chris, I'm going to say over to you. I would do amazing intros, but I think, you know, it's February. We've just had Valentine's Day. We've had a weird SONA. The people
I don't know
got
where that
really,
was
really.
going. I was like, where's this going?
You're a bit nervous, right?
Yeah, I was like,
And and I don't know what, I must just say, side note, SONA really annoys me when everybody arrives dressed up like it's a fashion parade. I just don't understand that.
mhm.
We have such deep issues in our economy, and we have got all these ministries that are not really working well, worried about what they're wearing more than worried
Yep.
about what they're actually saying. But in the spirit of being kind and nice, everybody did look great. But I think you guys are going to unpack it a bit deeper for us and just explain for us as members in the room how this is going to affect us, within the membership of SAEFA. And is it just empty promises, or do you guys feel that we are on a good trajectory? And I know, Chris, you're sharing at the moment. So can I hand it over to you guys? And every now and again, I'll interrupt if there's a great question or a comment.
Thank you, Brad. I do appreciate that and setting the scene as always. I really appreciate you teeing us up. So we're gonna run with the ball and see where we go. I'll maybe I can give the conclusion already of the presentation. I'll get into more detail, but Fence and I, we were fortunate enough this year to attend the SONA. We did not dress up as much as some others, but we were there in person, and it was interesting the energy. To me, it
Yeah.
felt a bit sort of not depressed, but lackluster. Just in terms of those people attending, the ministers, the celebrities, those who sort of surrounding it. I thought President Ramaphosa he was quite energetic for a SONA versus some of his others. And to be honest, I was with him for the first half of the SONA, even though it was quite long. There was an element of more honesty in his SONA around crime, water. These are issues we need to tackle. We're not trying to shirk away from those. Then in
Mm.
the second half, he started talking about bullet trains and those things. And then he lost me personally. So I was with him for the first half. He had me in the first half, and then second half, maybe not so much. But overall, we'll give you what we think are the key takeaways from this year's SONA. I should highlight tomorrow, of course, we have the main budget for the year being delivered by the Minister of Finance. And in many ways, the budget is more important because it tells
Yeah.
you where the rands and cents are actually going. So the
Mm.
SONA is one thing you want it to be a vision and a promise by governments. Often the promises
Mm.
aren't delivered upon, but you want it to be grand. Your budget is going to be about, who's got the ear of the minister, who's got the ear of national treasury, where's the money going, all that sort of thing. So keep in mind those two and how they should ideally work together. They don't always, but
Mm.
let's see what
Mm.
tomorrow gives us. All right. I mentioned the optimistic and energetic tone that I thought President Ramaphosa struck. Keep in mind, he is probably in his last year as ANC president, not necessarily as country president, because, of course, that runs to 2029. We've got in 2027 the next ANC elective conference. Now, he could try and go for a third term and could very well win because he remains the most popular political figure for the ANC and indeed in the country. But things don't go well when someone tries to run for a third term as ANC president. That didn't work out well for Thabo Mbeki, not even for Jacob Zuma, even though he had more popular support. So President Ramaphosa could be going into this last year really, you know, if one assumes the best case scenario, if he's a reformer, he doesn't have to worry about a re-election. And I wonder if that maybe informed part of the tone in the SONA, where he's really trying to get really push things quite far. So He began his speech by recalling history and past achievements. He referred to various points in South Africa's history. I thought he set the tone well in terms of appealing to emotionalism and sentiment. We'll get into whether we think it's merited, whether it can deliver. But from that point of view, I thought he set a good kind of tone. He acknowledged problems, but neglected to mention that his party was responsible for many of them. So it's always, these are issues, these are problems caused, it's happening to us, but it's never what role did we play in this. And that is forecast to continue for the time being. So I quote here, and we agree with this assessment by the president: for too many people, life remains hard, jobs are scarce, opportunities out of reach. Many South Africans are, of course, worried about violent crime and corruption, concerned about the state of the government, inability to deliver services, and people are desperate for work and an income to support their families. So, 100% agreed that could be in a CRA risk alert. So maybe the president is, I don't know if offense is maybe leaking some of our risk alerts to the presidency, but that's quite an accurate assessment. He identified the solution. He said for more than 15 years, our economy has experienced low growth. All our actions now are driven by the need for rapid and inclusive economic growth. So again, you've got the promises, you've got the rhetoric, the right kind of rhetoric. When it comes to implementation and delivery, we have concerns, and it's based on the track record of how things have gone. So we've got more task teams that have been established in things like water. The question is, can they now this time function differently than before? I think probably not, but let's see. I hope to be proven wrong. So as I mentioned, a good first half. He had me in the first half, and then we started talking about things that are a bit more pie in the sky. We talked about bullet trains, we talked about smart cities, we talked about all sorts of things that if you just talk about a basic governance and service delivery point of view, you want to talk about things like water delivery and crime. Let's get a handle on those. Then we can worry about a bullet train from Johannesburg to Messina or wherever else you wanted to go. Then we can do that. So with him having set the scene, the second half I thought was a bit more frantic. He mentioned growth no fewer than 25 times. That is a record for that particular concept or that phrase, and it's one that we think is arguably the most important. And he announced a flurry of measures which could be seen as campaigning for the next local government election. So trust in us, we're establishing task teams, things are going to work. But keep in mind, the next local government elections are scheduled to happen between November of this year and then February or March of 2027, probably towards the end of this year, but that's the window that we have for the next local government elections. They haven't been announced yet, the date, but that's what our window is for our next local government elections. So the second half was more of a wish list and grandiose statements and aims. I mentioned a SONA is supposed to be a bit of a stretch speech, stretch goals, try and aim towards things. So you want an element of that, but you also need a dose of realism. So whether that balance has been struck, we will see. We look at some of our headline takeaways and items to keep in mind from the SONA. So the plan is to deploy the SANDF to tackle illegal mining and gang violence. We have a big concern here about deploying the army to deal with crime, to tackle crime. Number one, your SANDF is trained for conflict, for war. When someone shoots at them, the training is to shoot back. They're not trained for day-to-day law enforcement and policing and that kind of thing. So last time the army was deployed during COVID, we had various abuses of citizens. We had the killing of one citizen, Collins Khoza, in his front yard for the crime of daring to drink a beer in his front yard. This was by the SANDF. So what reason do we have that things will be different this time? Will there be the necessary oversight? Will there be coordination between the army and SAPS? That's the question. You want crime to be tackled. I just don't think this is the best way to be doing this. We need SAPS to be trained and given the equipment. You need the leadership of SAPS to be righted for corrupt people to be pushed out of SAPS. So let's see here exactly how this particular method is implemented. You've got vetting and lifestyle audits on top South African Police Service and Metro Police chiefs. We've had promises of audits before and they haven't happened, including for ministers. So again, a promise. Let's see if there's delivery. You've got a protection bill for whistleblowers, very important in the fight against corruption. You've got the National Prosecuting Authority that does seem to be on a bit of a better trajectory, but you still haven't seen prosecutions. But this kind of thing, if it is implemented well, if it is adhered to, this is the kind of thing in the ecosystem and combating corruption that you do want. So you do want these kinds of legal changes and legislative changes. President Ramaphosa is set to chair a water crisis committee. In this particular one, what he neglected to mention is that there is a national water crisis task team committee in any case, and that's chaired by Deputy President Paul Mashatile. So is he saying he doesn't think that the Deputy President is doing what he should be doing? Are they going to work together? Why does the President need to chair this committee if we already have the Deputy President in charge of it? Now, those of us who live in Johannesburg will encounter water outages on a daily basis. It's around other parts of the country as well, unfortunately. So water, undoubtedly a very important issue. But the question is, why do you need national government, national cabinet to establish a crisis committee if, as Offense has often pointed out, it can take the management of Johannesburg, the city management, to fix leaking pipes? Exactly. Why does it take national government to do that? So, restructuring Eskom. Here we saw the president, I think, putting his foot down, at least in rhetoric, against the Minister of Electricity, Minister Ramaphosa. So we've had over the last few years this supposed attempt to unbundle Eskom, so intergeneration and transmission. You've got an independent tariff setter operating company. But over the last month, the statements, and December last year, statements from Minister Ramaphosa indicated that that independent entity that was supposed to be the referee in all this, it was actually going to be part of Eskom, so it wouldn't be truly independent. And in the SONA, President Ramaphosa indicated that the unbundling is going to continue apace as intended beforehand. So he's trying to send that signal to markets, to investors, that this is going to happen and they can come and invest in things like renewable energy, gas, etc. And maybe telling Minister Ramaphosa, look, this is the line that I'm treading and you need to follow. Whether the minister does that is a different question. To continue with Brad.
Sorry,
please,
brother. Would you mind if I just jump in a bit? Do you guys mind if I jump in?
No, not at all.
It just helps with the concentration levels as well from my side. So this is a great summary. I think it's really nice. But a lot of what we've mentioned, most of it, the whistleblower protection bill, it hasn't even gone through the channels. It hasn't even been created in a sense. So that's quite far away, because it has to jump through civil society. It has to go through all the hoops that it needs to go through. Also, deploying this SANDF, that hasn't even been finalized yet. We're not sure exactly which areas they're going to be deployed into, although we were given kind of these Johannesburg and Cape Town kind of general areas. And as we know here in Johannesburg, for the illegal mining, they're pretty much literally in every suburb, like a Checkers 6060 guy. So I think for me, what I picked up was from SONA was there was definitely high spirits towards the president coming from the opposition benches, where we were expecting to have a very vocal opposition. It was incredibly subdued.
Yeah.
So I think what it tells me is everybody sees that they have to all jump on board to make a difference. That for me was a massive shift. But a lot of what the president spoke about, for me, are not really attainable. And that concerns, me as a member of SAEFA, it concerns me because on the ground level, I'm supposed to be instituting, skills development, bringing in artisans, training them, giving them skills, but I'm not invested because I'm not reassured that my property is going to be looked after. I'm not reassured that I'm going to have water and electricity in my property. You know what I mean? My business is under a lot of strain. Offensia, what was your takeaway in that sense? Do you think this is all going to trickle down in a positive way to us on the ground?
So, okay, I unmuted. So it'll all depend on the implementation and how. It'll all depend on the implementation. We've all been disappointed before by past SONAs where some nice promises were made and they never got down to the people. But another point on that is that the theme that we both noticed, Chris and I, from the SONA address is that there was a huge focus on centralization rather than devolution. So getting national government to solve issues that typically would require community-based metro and provincial solutions to the problem, as the next slide shows. So deploying the army is an example of centralization. Declaring foot and mouth disease a national disaster, another example of centralization, where the private sector in the farming community have been asking for more powers to solve this solution, but now the Minister of Agriculture and the President are given more power to solve this issue. So never in the history of South Africa have I seen Pretoria gaining more power to solve a problem. Typically,
It
when
is
you
on
want
the
to solve,
ground.
it's on the ground. It should be going down to provinces, then metros, municipalities, then communities and neighborhoods. So
Is that in
the
anticipation, sorry, brother, is that in anticipation of the ANC losing a lot of metros now with the local government elections and wanting to kind of retain key decision-making powers in Pretoria? Because according to my sources and according to what I'm seeing out there, I think they're going to have a tough time at the local polls.
we could build that connection, but to avoid going too much into it, I would say this is ANC policy. This is what they've been doing for the past 3 decades, and
Good
it's just
point.
a doubling down of what they already know.
Okay. Thank you so much, brother. Do you guys want to take us through the next slide?
Sounds good. Yeah, that's a good segue because we did discuss now the centralization point. So President Ramaphosa, maybe his cabinet, they're betting a lot on spending more money and that the presidency gets involved in things like water crime, that will solve many of our problems. So maybe on the surface level, it could provide a kind of necessary shock to the system. And if you think, if you don't deliver and the president's involved, maybe theoretically there is more accountability. But this also assumes that if you just get the right people in certain places, that the problems are fixed, where I think it's more of an institutional issue, it's more of a policy issue. It's unfortunately a bit deeper than just getting the right individuals in the right places. So from water delivery to crime to firearm ownership, foot and mouth disease, the assumption is that presidential involvement and national oversight will cure all ills. And maybe short term, it can help, but it doesn't fix underlying deeper policy and legislative issues. Those remain unaddressed or superficially dealt with. So, Brad, to your point here, government and specifically the ANC, I think they do their own polling. They'll look at polling that we do, that others do. They'll try and correlate. They'll talk to businesses, even their funders they'll talk to, and they'll say more and more power is slipping away. The issue is here, they're really trying to tighten their grip as much as possible. And that's probably going to force even more power to slip away. So if you try and hold on to it and you're not doing the right things, it is going to disappear faster than you think.
It's a huge gamble, Chris.
Yeah, no,
I think it's
absolutely.
a huge gamble. And I'm just not quite certain that SONA this year, the engineering industry is under an immense amount of strain. I think we all know it's sitting in this room. And it's because of outdated policy, but also because of the lack of will to implement any sort of structural policy, from employment issues right through to structural issues. There's just a lack of interest. And I think I see it as a lack of interest, but in retrospect, it's just because the people that are there don't know how. So, from that perspective, did SONA mention anything around, bringing in the right educational tools, bringing in the right kind of processes and policies in the education space to help give these guys the power of knowledge so that they can resolve these issues? I mean, for this foot and mouth outbreak, to take it to national government, for national government or for Pretoria to handle it, for me was a very strange, when we had the infrastructure in all the provinces to deal with this effectively.
Exactly.
So, this constant need to, and now they kind of roped the DA into it. We were hoping the DA would kick against that. But it seems like Steenhuisen is having a wonderful time there in that ministry.
Yeah, when you get the perks from national government, it does maybe produce some perverse incentives. It is I'm glad you raised that. We had a briefing this morning for an embassy from a European country, and they talked about their experiences with coalition government and how different parties and the one individual, the sort of main representative that we spoke with, he said in your coalitions, you do have parties that need to make sure that they put forward their own clear and that means their own, their own color, their own ambit, how they differentiate themselves from each other. So if you're a national government in a coalition, how do you still differentiate yourself from that coalition, from the parties in it, and retain your own still identity, your values, to your vote, to your base, maybe to appeal to other voters? And I think for the DA and some others, like the Patriotic Alliance, after the SONA, and in the response to the SONA in Parliament, Gates and McKenzie said, why are we going to throw stones? Why are we going to throw rocks at the ANC now? We have a seat at the table. It's like, but every time before this year and before Government of National Unity, you would use every opportunity to rightly criticize the ANC, but now you're at the table. So it is something for our parties in the coalition to figure out, where do they draw the lines? Do they, do you threaten to leave? And then if you don't leave, it's, you're undermining your leverage and your position. But also, how do you differentiate yourself from what's going on? How do you own what you've said you're going to set to do? And if you realize there are limitations, how do you convince your supporters that you should still be in national government, that you aren't being co-opted? The Freedom Front Plus, they will probably this year, I'm not saying that the foot and mouth disease outbreak will radically damage the DA's voter support. I think it will hurt them in some aspects. And the Freedom Front Plus and the PA are poised to benefit. The Freedom Front Plus has done well from a narrative point of view, but they're also a national government. So they're not being sort of ascribed the fault for what's going on in that particular area. So how you play these games of optics and narrative in the local government election cycle is going to be very interesting, how they do that.
Offensive, what are you thinking, brother?
I agree mostly with what Chris is saying. It's the politics around it is the ones that win the political scores are the ones that are best at playing the politics around it. So Gayton McKenzie, he has already handed himself to the ANC from the get-go. Even before the GNU was formed, he told his voters that should a coalition be formed, I'm going to get into a coalition with the ANC. Whereas with the DA, we had different expectations with them. They said they would oppose the ANC and they would not get into a coalition with them, but ended up doing so. So now in these situations where we are wanting some GNU partners to critique the ANC, the PA does not get as much flack as the DA does when it sides with the ANC because of the expectations that they've created for themselves and for us and for their respective voters as well.
But it's still yet again kind of all new territory, hey, Chris, when it comes to this type of government for us, especially, more recently than previous.
Yeah, and we arguably don't really have any, even with that, you don't have it would be useful to have a coherent and principled opposition, but we don't have that in Parliament. So regardless of what you might think ideologically of parties like MK, the EFF, there's no real sort of focused, coherent opposition to the GNU in Parliament. That brings its own sort of challenges. So you've got unchecked GNU that the biggest risk to it is from within the GNU. It's not externally. But then you also don't have MK and the EFF that are holding their feet to the fire and acting as effective opposition. I think the EFF did well in the budget last year on the whole VAT story. But other than that, they've been very quiet from a just, accountability point of view.
Yeah, and I think as the government kind of clamps down on, on compliance and starts getting the big heavy hitters in for compliance violations, they're going to lose a lot of money within the political parties because these guys sponsor specific political parties, not just one. So that's also going to open us up to the guys with the money supporting political parties purely just to make sure that they stay in business, and just puts us where the US is at the moment with all their super PACs, et cetera, et cetera. So it's just absolutely interesting space. But let's say I didn't have the energy to watch SONA. I was cooking, I had kids, or visiting
anything
mom,
else better.
Doing something. I love it. I watch it from beginning to end. I've attended one, I'm lucky, but I would never do it again in person because it's too stressful. But it's very interesting to watch. I think the one thing I did notice is that our army parade or security forces parade seemed a lot stronger than the US, made me smile a bit. They were a lot more interested in being there on the day. They marched in line and they had a bit of a rhythm to them, and I thought that was quite cool. But key takeaways, Offense, do you want to take us through that, brother?
Key takeaways, sure. Chris, do you mind?
Yeah, no problem.
So key takeaways we got from the SONA. Can the recovery continue? We use a health analogy in our flagship briefing for this year, Pulse of the Nation. So how's the South African patient handling the current trajectory in these times of the GNU? And we see that South Africa is in the recovery scenario, and can the recovery continue? And the patient is indeed showing some positive signs, and signs that but with some serious risks, but some positive signs, as we've seen some economic upticks that we've seen in the past few 6 months. I'd say, despite the tariffs being in place from the US, our export numbers are up. Our unemployment, although it's still stubbornly high, is ticking down by the decimals. Our GDP has tripled, even though that triple means we grew by 1.4% from 2024 to 2025, and thus there's reasons to be slightly optimistic. In terms of GNU stability, Chris is going to the budget, and the budget situation, or the conundrum that took place last year that had the rand very nervous. We believe that scenario won't play out again. But in politics, really anything can happen. But we believe that scenario won't happen again. The GNU has stabilized in a sense. The party leaders amongst themselves communicate more. As you said, John Steenhuisen is a bit comfortable up there being in cabinet. So there's not much headbutting, and there's a lot more communication, which is some reason to be optimistic of the GNU as well. It's impacted with its limited, but its impact is limited without addressing the actual anti-growth priorities. So although there are upticks into our economic indicators, they're still poor. We still have the highest unemployment rate. Our fixed investment is still way below the global average at 13%. Not enough investment is going into fixed assets. It's one thing buying stocks at the JSE, but you can just sell your stocks as easy as you can buy them. Whereas investing in fixed assets, in buildings and factories and shopping centers and shops, that's a 5, 10, 15, 20-year investment. And we're not seeing enough of that. And that reflects into business confidence. And that business confidence reflects to government priorities and policies. We're not seeing the shift in pro-growth policies that we expected from the GNU. The stocks show that sentiment, but on the ground, we're not seeing enough of that. I think, Chris, you'd like to add on to that?
Just the point around whether our economic recovery, is it just commodities based? Is it just the JSE? Is it just our financial sector? For the time being, it still is. We aren't seeing it in construction, in manufacturing, in mining, in automotive, in those sectors that, should they increase and improve, they would tell you that there is real economic growth sort of on the horizon. It's not just, thanks to President Trump that the gold price has surged, for example.
Yeah. Or it's not just the import of microchips that's carrying the entire economy.
Yes, and lobbying. You mentioned the super PACs. I wonder what contribution they make to economic activity in the US. Someone should do a graph on this.
Yeah, can you imagine being around that table? So unemployment, I think let's spend a bit of time there, because that really does affect us. Sometimes it feels the pressure is on us as members to, bring in literally people off the street, train them, give them the skills, with the risk of them moving on, either leaving or moving on to other companies. It really makes us pretty vulnerable, and it kind of disenfranchises us from the concept of wanting to support our communities with training and skills development, which I think a lot of us should, especially a lot of us older, skilled engineers, etc., who have the knowledge to pass that knowledge on. But this is not really the environment to do that in, and we can see that in the unemployment figures. Am I right? What do you guys think?
Yeah, that's exactly right. We almost we disincentivize job creation, skill sharing, capital formation. We make it especially especially difficult in the South African context. Yesterday we had one briefing with an embassy, and they mentioned just in South Africa what they get from their companies that operate in South Africa is, yes, they understand compliance. Every country has its compliance requirements. That's one thing. But here, then you also have to spend on your own electricity, your own safety for your employees, your own water, for example. So we make ourselves less competitive through some of the policy choices that we make. One data point we want to share is just long-term versus short-term unemployment. So we don't want to pretend that any country is perfect and anywhere has perfect employment, except maybe for North Korea. I guess they have perfect employment. No one is out of work there, but that's not the kind of employment situation we want. We want a dynamic environment. We want, if people fall out of work, there should be more dynamism, opportunities for internships, upskilling, but also your labor policies need to be more flexible there. That if something isn't working out, you part your ways. It should be between the employer and the employees. It's not necessarily that the state has to get involved at every level. So just on this particular data point, this is long-term and short-term unemployment. Long-term unemployment is if you're unemployed for 1 year or more, short-term unemployment, 1 year or less. You can see quarter on quarter from 2008 all the way up until 2024, 2025, every quarter, the red portions of each quarter of each bar, those keep growing. So those are your people who are out of work for 1 year or more. So formal employment. I'm not mentioning the informal economy. It is very important in our context and it plays an important role, but it's not put into these numbers. Your orange section, those are people in short-term unemployment, so 1 year or less. Those remain pretty consistent across the board. But you want more people, ideally in short-term unemployment, so there's more dynamism, more opportunities, versus just falling out of work and remaining out of work. So if we've got around 8.4 million people unemployed, the vast majority of that, more than 2/3, are out of work for 1 year or more. That's the sort of employment reality or unemployment reality in South Africa, despite, as Offensive mentioned, some of the positive upticks in the last few quarters, where the official unemployment rate comes somewhat down here and there, a few decimal points, but long-term unemployment remains a serious risk to the South African economy and to doing business in South Africa. So let's say this economic sentiment, economic turnaround we've seen for the last 12 months. We've boosted by the commodities upswing. The JSE is doing well. You've got 1.4% growth this year projected. If that 1.4% goes into 1.8% next year, into 2.5% the year thereafter, into 2030, 2035, you've got quarterly and year-on-year growth of 2% and higher. Then you're in your environment where we're in our positive sort of scenario, where there is more reason to think, okay, now you take a punt on South Africa. It's not just about survival. It's about deploying more capital. It's about trying to employ more people because it is easier to do business. Then I think you can say it's not just a sort of commodities boost, but it's real economic reform, policy reform that has been made. We see some of the rhetoric in things like electricity, in logistics with Transnet, but we don't see it on things like BEE, for example. We don't see it on property rights. The NHI, the president said, the NHI is on hold, not because they don't think it's a good idea, but because there's litigation on the go against the NHI. So keep in mind just the macro policy space. Maybe on the logistics side, we'll see some reforms, more competition, those prices will come down. But on the macro policy side, things remain constraining to doing business in South Africa.
So Chris, basically, if I understand it correctly, we've got a formal, informal, and kind of the black economy. Right. That's kind of how I kind of see it now. And I was chatting to Ben, my AI chap here with me, and we were chatting together and we were talking through the concept of, it's often been raised that our unemployment rate doesn't really truly reflect across all of these economies. And if we had to recalculate it, it would be far less. I know it's a bit of a sidebar, but what are your guys' thoughts on that?
Yeah, maybe Offensive, I'll go first, so please add here. I do think the informal economy is bigger than, estimated, than even some of the estimations and projections. And that could be partly why we don't have the wide-scale, consistent unrest that borders on sort of civil war levels that you see in other countries with similarly high levels of unemployment or even close to ours, because people can still engage in some kind of economic activity. Now, it doesn't come with the protections of formal employment or the legal protections or any of that stuff, but it's still nonetheless economic activity, trying to sell goods and services, trying to make a living, trying to put food on the table for your kids, that kind of thing. And in many ways, we could be grateful to our informal economy, but on the other hand, if you're caught in the informal, if you operate in the informal economy, you are more exposed to other risks that you aren't in the formal economy. You also look at the factor of illegal immigration and how that kind of economic activity impacts on those South African businesses that operate in the informal economy. That also raises the risk possibly of conflict and strife between different sort of demographic groups. So it comes with its benefits, and I think it's substantial risks, but it's definitely there, and you're right to highlight it, because I think it does help us from a sort of stability outlet point of view in the macro picture.
But why is there no mention to formalize the informal economy and to reduce the size of the black economy, meaning the illicit economy? Why is there no overarching theme? Because there sits a lot of compliance responsibilities that are not being adhered to, which makes us as operators in a formal economy who sometimes employ from the informal economy, it puts us at risk. So why is there no real collective getting that sorted out? If it's going to bring our employment rate down and introduce some tax money into our economy.
I'm sure SARS is at every opportunity pushing for it to be formalized. You've had working papers from different players, but so keep in mind vested interest. It does benefit many politicians that the illicit economies in different respects, especially cigarettes, but those have grown so much. It does benefit many politicians across the board. So just from that pure selfish point of view, they benefit. And then maybe number two, just on the practical side, you have seen rhetorical attempts to do this, but on the practical side, keep in mind how difficult it was to, and not that it even has been formalized properly, but to formalize the minibus taxis and the different taxi associations and the fight that they put up against that kind of thing. And even now, if there's any kind of attempt at more regulation. So if you try and go into the informal economy broadly with your state that is encountering the many skills and other issues it is, I think that's such a gargantuan task. You don't even, at least we don't, maybe we'll never hear that in the SONA, because if they try that, then you're really sort of pie in the sky territory, even though, as you say, there are many benefits to it. But they just realize to do that is going to be a massive challenge, I think.
In other words, the informal economy is that big.
Yeah.
And to add to that, the ideological priorities of the government of the day it's mostly focused on race rather than class. In terms of that, I mean, it's more important for the ANC in terms of their ideology to get more black people in the offices in Sandton rather than developing people that are in townships. And that's why we don't get the upward mobility from people from lower class to middle class. And instead, you get people going up within the middle class, where you get an extremely rich and an extremely poor. And that's why the inequality keeps on increasing, because the current initiatives of the day are meant to improve the lives, not of the poor, but of the black. And whether the black is poor or middle class or rich, they benefit from these government policies. We get less people moving in from Mamelodi to Silver Lakes, and we get more people moving in from Silver Lakes to Blue Valley. As long as they're black, that mobility is a good thing for the ANC, but they're not missing the real issue, which is poverty.
It's the cycle of poverty. And, if you, let's say, for example, you're foundry owner and you bring in a cohort to put through a training process that you've created in your business, there's a lot of risk there. It's not, there's a lot of risk. First of all, you've got to be very careful who you introduce into your business, because it's literally a safety risk. You don't know. And there's no conclusive background checking that you can actually do. There is an element of assumption. You have to make an assumption because systems aren't integrated. So if this person's coming from a predominantly informal economy, he's going to really be under the radar. So if he's had a bad track record in going from business to business and falling out and doing all sorts of things, you're going to inherit that. So I think, in my view, SONA on it, and I don't want to be negative, because this is not the purpose of the session. It's how does this benefit the members? What did SONA say to benefit the members? but I'm finding it very difficult to find anything on the ground. And I'm wondering if it was purposely done like that so that when the local government elections do happen, and there's a change of government on the ground, it'll be left up to them to kind of pick up the pieces, and that becomes that blame game.
Yeah,
Because
you're
everything's
SONA,
Biden's fault, everything
yeah.
is DA's fault. In Joburg, it's DA's fault, and and it just is this blaming on the past kind of thing. But to kind of, we've got a few minutes left and with hardly any questions, but the one question I want to ask is, again, if we had to reassure the member on the ground, the guy that goes into Germiston, into his premises, shows up every day, anything come out of SONA that can give him an opportunity to feel like, okay, this is it, we're back on track?
I mean, I do think the first half of SONA was different from previous SONAs because it was more realistic. And the second half was when it got more pie in the sky kind of thing. The realism to me does indicate that some in government are realizing what the situation on the ground is, how dire it is. And we have to keep hammering that point, whether it's through discussions like this, when businesses engage one-on-one with policymakers, and it could be national, provincial, and metro level, municipal level. It could be through forums, more formal labor or business forums, all that kind of thing. Maybe number two is that despite, it's that deficit between promise and implementation, so that trust deficit in government. Despite that, and it's been increasing for years, if not decades, despite that, your South African middle class across racial lines is very aspirational, want high quality of life, want businesses to work, that kind of thing. That doesn't happen. You can't just drop a middle class into different places and assume it will always be the same. So we've got that in our favor. So there's an element of wanting to do business, of wanting things to improve. It's now about sort of capitalizing on that energy and making sure it's got the right kind of outlets. I'm not saying it happens overnight, possibly medium to long term, but that ingredient is there. That's not there in other countries around the world. So if we've got for the last 18 months the GNU that is relatively stable, if you've got good performance on the JSE, your rand is below 16 to the dollar, those ingredients, if you now start to pair that with hints of reform here and there, and in some ways I want to talk about the dam wall breaking. So a review of BEE, for example. Let's see what comes out of it. It could be more negative. But for the first time, you've got the questioning and discussions of policies that were sacred cows before. And these conversations did not happen anyway. And that is happening now. Now it's about maintaining the pressure, driving wages where we can, seeing opportunities, making sure that momentum is sustained. It's not going to happen overnight, but I think there is, for the first time, that real possibility that we haven't seen for maybe 3 decades.
And could we use this opportunity to get your predictions on local government elections, please, gentlemen? Who do I bet for at my betting company? Who's coming to Joburg? Chris,
at the CRA, we don't do predictions. We do scenario planning.
Sorry, guys.
Strategic foresight.
Yeah, but what's the temperature out there? Who's the front players?
So, from the polling that has been put into public, it's very clear to see that the DA will be the biggest party in Johannesburg. So that's a safe bet. The question is whether the DA will get enough to form a coalition or to govern by itself. If the DA is shortfall of 5% from 50%, for example, it's only 2 like-minded parties that it can form a coalition with, is the Freedom Front Plus and the ACDP. Those 2 parties tend to get 1% in Johannesburg. So even if Helen Zille makes 48% in a coalition, that other 52% will have either ANC or Herman Mashaba as the mayor of Johannesburg. We've seen in Tshwane, Ekurhuleni, and Johannesburg, where the ANC would partner with a smaller party and make a candidate of that smaller party the mayor. But as long as the ANC is holding the finance portfolio, then they're happy with it. So that's very much a possible scenario for Johannesburg.
Chris, you agree?
I do, despite the foot and mouth bump in the road for the DA. The momentum is positive. For the time being, the DA benefits from being in the GNU from a perceptions point of view. Any failures of the GNU are rightly or wrongly ascribed to the ANC, and successes are ascribed to the other parties, and especially to the DA. So the DA will remain there. They'll try and use every opportunity they can. They've got their next leadership congress in April. Very likely Jordan Hill-Lewis will be the next leader. Wide range of support for him. Whether he can be leader and mayor of Cape Town is another challenge, another question. But that aside, they've got that momentum possibly to use. Keep in mind just the challenge from some smaller parties like the Freedom Front Plus and the PA. I think the PA, Gayton McKenzie, is very good at capitalizing on any platform and a perception game. He's very good at that. So they will probably continue to be the sort of kingmaker roles. I guess the big unknown, and it's interesting that it is again, as it was in 2024, is how is MK going to do? So MK, I mean, 2024 came in, they were only established in December of 23, so they rode that momentum, sort of new player on the scene, took the progressive moniker away from the EFF, the disruptor. But they've encountered so many leadership challenges. I don't know if they can continue that. And in local elections, like your ground game needs to be on point. The ANC is always very good at the ground game and getting supporters to turn out. If MK doesn't have its eye on the ball in that regard, never mind at a national level, how they're going to do, I think, is a big risk for them. Maybe lastly, just on local elections, voter turnout does tend to be lower than in national elections. And lower voter turnout does disproportionately hurt the ANC more than it hurts other parties. So if the other parties, including the DA, get their voters to turn out, in our system of proportional voting, proportional democracy, those other parties will benefit massively.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting space. And I think I always feel like there's a political party that we're not even aware of that's going to come through the ranks. It's kind of that in gaming, it's like that rogue player that no one's ever heard of. It's got a strange name like Dark or
MK
Storm
has
or
traumatized
something.
us.
Yes.
Yeah, it really has, hasn't it? But I also think, Africa's a land of extremes. So, I feel like we're maturing in the space where we kind of realizing that this is the space that we kind of occupy. This is our space, and we have to make the space work. And I think what we're seeing globally with all the challenges they're having is making us truly understand that we are kind of the land of milk and honey. And I think if we can just get our heads around how do we actually envision that and make that happen, I think that could be a huge difference. And, I appreciate when you guys come in, because I think you must see the good, the bad, and the ugly. And yet you always kind of show up with a positivity, and you always have a very unbiased point of view of how things are going to work. So I really take my hat off because you guys are in the space all the time. We've got about 5 minutes left. We've had great attendance. No one dropped off, which means we were fairly interesting, or dinner's not ready yet and they need to go off to dinner. But Chris, closing comments. The whole idea of this was just to unpack this for our members and just talk through the impact that it's going to have for us on the ground. What are your closing thoughts, Bert?
Yeah, so thanks, Brad, for hosting, and again for stimulating the discussion. It helps us a lot as the analysts who have to read a lot and talk a lot, that we actually get that kind of feedback and that direction. So it is really appreciated. And to everyone who joined, thank you. I think South Africa is poised, and we highlighted this going into 2024, that we're going into our era of coalition government. That comes with a lot of contestation, a lot of competition in our politics, and opportunities that weren't there before. So to keep identifying those opportunities, keep that momentum going, there are more than ever before questions about developed economies, developed markets like the US, the role of the dollar, the Federal Reserve. That doesn't mean capital is guaranteed to come to South Africa, but those investors are asking more questions, and they're going to look for opportunities to invest. So, don't hedge on waiting for national government. Yes, I think there were good points in the SONA, there were risk points, and it's always a mixed bag in terms of doing business in South Africa. But even that, our upside in the sort of next decade, I think, is quite large if some of the basics do get taken care of. And it doesn't mean we need silver bullets, bullet trains, magic wands. It really is basics of service delivery, just competency, that kind of thing that we get right. And the sort of multiplier effect is quite substantial.
Yes, I've got a question before Offensive finishes up. Are you standing?
Yes, I am.
Do you stand because do you lack focus? Is it help?
I think I stand because I know I sit too much usually. So I've had a standing desk for about 2 years, and I wanted to
Oh my
just
word,
be
Chris.
more relatively active. So
I've got so many questions right now. So you work off a standing desk. You don't get tired, what?
I do. Some days, if I'm standing behind the desk the whole day,
Yeah,
it
because you
does get a bit
forget,
tiring.
right? While you're working, you
It's
forget
just,
that, yeah.
but I
Sure
think
doesn't.
overall it's been good for me in terms of just some activity and posture, because I do tend to prawn a bit when I'm writing and sitting in front of my laptop.
Fair enough. So, Vence, I've got a question for you. Where's your surviving the day kitty poster? I think I need to send you one.
I
Your office
agree.
is looking a
Please
bit bland
do.
there, brother.
Me, wow.
It's just notes.
Yeah, really, like serial killer, dude. Okay. So what are your closing comments, brother? So what are you thinking for members here that are sitting in the room, the ones that are here for
Sure
ground level
thing.
support and advice? What's your thoughts?
Sure thing. My Madlanga commission map is over here, so you can't see that. No, but then a positive note is that, like Chris mentioned, the first half of the SONA was something positive and something to takeaways. A lot that the president mentioned in that first half of his address was an investment in fixed assets. That he kept repeating on that so many times. And at the CRA, we call that the gross fixed capital formation. We call that metric that indicator the most important number in South Africa. This is the investment in fixed assets, how much money is spent by public and private sector in immovable assets. And he kept reiterating on that. So for me, this was I think his 10th SONA address, so many. I think the most out of every president we've ever had. And for me personally, that was his best SONA address purely because of that focused on government spending on something that is productive. He didn't announce a universal basic income grant. We might get surprised and hear that tomorrow, but he didn't announce spending on welfare and entitlements and universal grants and so on. The spending that he spoke of in the SONA was on investment and infrastructure and productivity. So I think that's something important to take away from it. It's a good positive to take home with.
And accountability, if they pull through with what they're saying and holding local government accountable, individuals and as a collective, I think will be really positive. If we can start seeing that, I think that would really shift a lot of our perception. And perception, kind of drives intention. And that's really important for us, is to have the right intention when we're in this market. But guys, I want to say thank you very, very much for your time. I really, really appreciate it. It was a very interesting discussion. You guys are active on socials. I don't know if you want to, maybe if you have time, just to pop it in the chat, or maybe Nicole, when they send out the notices afterwards of this recording, they can just add your socials in there, because it's worth following and communicating with you guys. And then also we can also just maybe put out how the people can get hold of you if they need your services, or if they just want to have a conversation. I know Chris loves having coffee with random people all the time, so please book him full. Just kidding, brother. But
Only Gordon. I mean, Gordon, the amount of coffee meetings, my year is booked up with Gordon and coffee. I can't
oh,
get
really?
away.
Oh, gosh. Okay, cool. Well, guys, thank you very much. We're going to end the session. We appreciate everybody who sat through and attended. Not many questions, but we know that you guys are listening in, and we really, truly appreciate it. So, Erica, Lindiwe, Michaela, Clayton, very nice that you guys attended. Donnie, Donkey for coming through. Paul as well. Willem, we really appreciate it, guys. And we look forward to the next session. So take care, guys, and have a great day.
Thank you. Thanks,
Thank
Brad.
you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so
Cheers,
much.
guys.
Thanks, Brad. Thanks, Chris and Offense for joining us.
Sorry, Charlene, I didn't see you.
No,
Sorry.
no problem. Yes, I am. Yeah, I'm keeping my camera off just in case I go AWOL again.
Okay.
But yes, thanks, Chris and Offense, for your insightful analysis and the perspectives you've shared, and giving our members some greater clarity on the SONA. And thank you to all the members that have joined us. We really appreciate it. Thanks, Brad, too, for facilitating today's discussion, as you always do. Thanks, everybody.
Cheers, guys.
Great.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.